What's up, guys? Ben Pollock here with Lead FTS, and today I want to continue my discussion about VESP, right? The new form of autoregulation or new method of autoregulation that Taylor and I use in our training. And I wanted to talk about how it can be applied to bodybuilding. This is something that I touched on in the previous videos, but in case you missed those, the general gist of it is that, in my opinion, traditional methods of autoregulation, things like RPE, RIR, or even velocity training, often aren't practical for lifters. Not because they don't work, not because they're wrong in theory, but just because it's difficult to have the discipline or the patience to use them appropriately. I'm certainly guilty of this myself. So the method that Taylor and I developed, nothing new, nothing revolutionary, but it is a little bit simpler to apply in your training. The way it works for strength is that the moment you unrack the bar, the moment you begin your lift, you evaluate, hey, does this feel heavy or light? And you can kind of just don't stress over it. If it's heavy, you get that, oh shit, can I complete this lift feeling? Otherwise, you're like, yeah, I got this, then it's light, okay? Then you watch the video after the lift and you just objectively evaluate, as objectively as you can, evaluate, did the bar move fast, did the bar move slow? And based on those two parameters, you determine, okay, what was the RPE of this set, or what was the VESP of the set? And so if that's something you're interested in, I encourage you to go back and watch the other videos. I'll link them in the description below. I don't want to get too deep into covering material that I've already discussed. What I do want to talk about is how I believe this method can be applied to bodybuilding. And actually, in the context of bodybuilding, I would argue it might be superior to traditional RPE metrics. All right, so I'm going to explain why, and then I'm going to give you a few examples of how you might use VESP in your training. So, let's think about what we know about hypertrophy. First of all, we know there's two types of hypertrophy. There's myofibril and there's sarcoplasmic. Sarcoplasmic is your traditional volume training where you're doing a whole lot of sets and reps. That's building up the fluid, the intracellular fluid, and all the other stuff that's in your muscles besides contractile tissue. That's what gives bodybuilders this nice round look. It's why Dan Green, even when he's very lean, doesn't look the same as Big Ramy, right, who has those kind of balloon muscle bellies. Myofibril hypertrophy, is what is typically associated with strength training, where you're still training a heavy movement. It's just for higher reps, and you're building muscle tissue because you're eating in a caloric surplus. This is the actual contractile tissue. This is what we think of when we say, hey, more muscle can move more weight. It's really more contractile tissue can move more weight because your muscle is composed of more than just contractile tissue. To be the best bodybuilder you can be, you really need to use both types of hypertrophy. If you only use one, you're selling yourself short. Okay, so that's one thing we know. The other thing we know is that not all bodybuilders, in fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and say most bodybuilders don't train heavy all the time. And when I say heavy, heavy is relative. Heavy relative to their potential, right? There's a lot of bodybuilders out there who could probably, if they trained for it and mastered the technique, pull 800 pounds pretty easily, deadlift 800 pounds pretty easily. But you almost never see them attempt that because it's simply not worth the injury risk. Nevertheless, they're still doing heavy sets of, let's say, 6 to 10 reps with 600 pounds, which is challenging for them. It's just not heavy relative to the 1 rep max. That's kind of an extreme example. It's a lot easier when you go to an isolation movement, right? Any bodybuilder, well, that's bad. I'm not going to say that. Most bodybuilders, successful high-level guys, they could probably, let's say, bang out dumbbell raises with 50 pounds lateral raises. But maybe they would use a little bit of body English. It wouldn't be so strict. And so they go much lighter. Maybe they use as little as 20 pounds, but they really focus on that mind-muscle connection to get a good pump. And we can see by just looking at guys at the Olympia level, easiest way to do it, we can see that both methods can be very, very successful, right? So the question is, how do I combine all this into kind of a sound training routine? And that's already been covered by a lot of different people, and so I'm not going to rehash that right here. I have my own thoughts on the subject, but that'll be the topic for another video. I want to address one specific aspect of that, which is, okay, well, when I'm developing this program, whether it's my own program, whether I'm using somebody else's program, how do I evaluate my recovery, and how do I allot my effort to each individual movement within a training session so that I'm not wiped out by the end, right? If you're familiar with a traditional bodybuilding program, it's probably got 6 or 8 exercises in it. If you go ham on the first one, you're going to be wiped out by the last. And that's why we see a lot of people kind of deviate towards one type of method or another, right? You'll have the guys who are the high intensity advocates, the guys who are and that would be kind of like a Dorian Yates or a Mike Menser. Then you guys have the guys who are super high volume advocates, right? Jay Cutler, great example. Again, I really find that both are necessary to be successful. I just think that most people don't train in both ways because it's so complicated to put them together. So here's how I suggest putting them together. You just use the VESP scale. Here's how it works. We're still going to use the same metric. And the moment you start the lift, only the moment you very first start the lift, does that weight feel heavy or does it feel light? Now, in this context, heavy isn't going to be, oh shit, can I even lift this? Because you're not going for 1 rep. You're going for sets of 6 to 12 in general. But you still have an idea of, oh shit, can I get 6, right? Versus, yeah, I'm going to get 6 easy. This is going to be under control. That's your first metric. Does it feel heavy? Does it feel light? Second metric, still speed, but we're going to flip-flop it. In this case, slower is better. And that's because we know that controlling the eccentric in particular is a very valid driver of hypertrophy, and it's a way to show that you have total control over the weight, which is beneficial for bodybuilding, because if you do have total control over the weight, then you're more likely to be able to execute with a strong mind-muscle connection. I didn't forget the part where we still need to lift heavy. I'm getting to that. So it can be heavy or light. It can feel heavy or light, and then it can move slow, right, ideally, or it can also move fast and explosive. There's still value to that, right? There's still value to that because, and if you're wondering about this, John Meadows' ebook, Brutality of Mountain Dog Training, explains it in detail with Dr. Scott Stevenson. But because that really stimulates that myofibril hypertrophy better than the slow and controlled method. And then this is training guys like Branch Warren, right? He really went heavy and hard, even though he was using relatively high reps, okay? So that's kind of where I'm getting at with that, right? You've got the Branch Warren style of training, the Jay Cutler style of training. Trying to think of how we're going to combine these two. So there, from those two metrics, you can derive the 3 or 4 relevant RPEs or relevant VESPs, depending on what you want to call them, to your training. If it feels light at the very beginning of your set and you move every rep under control with a good mind-muscle connection, and the weight moves slowly, obviously, because it's under control, that's a 7. If the weight feels heavy, but you're still able to execute every single rep, slow and controlled, that's an 8. That's where the bulk of your training should probably be. Some movements you are going to want to move fast, strong, explosively. Typically, those will be your squats and your deadlifts. So it feels heavy, and you have to move it explosively, but still under control, to lift the weight. That's going to be a 9. If you lose control of the weight, that's a 10. Never want to go to a 10. Never want to lose control of the weight. But this gives us a really great way to combine both sarcoplasmic and myofibril training in one training session. Okay? So to give you guys a better idea of how this works, I'm going to, again, rely on John Meadows' kind of template for training. Now, if you are familiar with John Meadows, his RPE scale goes up to like 12. And that depends on your use of intensifiers and, are you doing drop sets? Are you doing force reps, etc. I have tons of respect for John. I don't like that scale. I don't think it's really useful. By the time you're doing crap like that, you have no idea how that's contributing to your strength, how that's contributing to your growth, how that's contributing to your recovery. So I like to save those for movements that I don't logbook, that are completely dependent on my subjective evaluation of my recovery. Do I need to do more or less work? Excuse me, that was a tangent. Let's get back to the actual subject. John's programs divided into 4 stages. Your first stage is going to be what he calls the pre-pump or activation stage. And that's going to be a movement that you're doing to build your mind-muscle connection and to help prepare your body both physically and mentally for the heavier work that you're going to do later in the workout. Okay? So in that pre-pump session, even though John's RPEs are probably going to go between 8 and 10 there, I want you at a 7 using the VESP scale. You're going to choose a weight that feels light and a weight that you can move slow and under control. But, and here's the cool thing, you can still go to failure like that. You can still go to failure where every single rep is moving slow, under control, the weight feels light. By the end of the set, the weight's still going to feel light. You're just going to have so much lactic acid and burn, which is going to help you build that mind-muscle connection, that you just can't complete any more reps. And again, we know from the research, training to failure is a very good driver of muscle growth. That's why you see guys like John, who has an RPE scale goes to 12. Mike Israetel, who takes almost every working set to failure when he's in the bulk of his mesocycle. Dorian Yates, right? Even though he was doing low volume, still every single session goes to failure. That's really where the magic of the VESP scale comes in. So then you move on to John's next phase, is the explosive phase of training. This will be his heavy movement. He also oftentimes uses them as indicator movements that are going to help determine, okay, how strong am I getting while following this hypertrophy movement? For those, obviously, you're training for strength or myofibral hypertrophy. Your weights are still going to be 6 to 12 range. You're still going to train at or very close to muscular failure, but you're going to move the weight explosively. And again, on a VESP scale, that's just going to be a 9. All right, so you have the 7 for the activation, a 9 for the explosive phase. Then you move on to the, I believe he calls it the peri-pump or something. Basically, it's just the pump phase. So after your heavy work, you're going to get a sick pump. This is typically where he'll use things like intensifiers or drop sets or whatever. For me, this is where you want your RPE or your VSP to be at an 8. So the weights are still going to feel heavy, but after you do your main movement, you're really focusing on being slow, controlled, methodical, and moving the weight perfectly. All right? And then John ends his workouts with a stretching phase, which I do think has some value if you want to give that a shot as well. But just in that kind of workout template alone, I've kind of shown you how, hey, I can take every working set to failure, but I can stimulate both sarcoplasmic and myofibral hypertrophy. I know what's the appropriate weight more or less to use. Yes, I will have to do some warm-ups to gauge that, but hey, I don't have to pre-plan my weights because you know, whether you're a powerlifter or a bodybuilder, you're not always going to be able to pre-plan your weight successfully. And it's really simple. It doesn't take a whole lot of time and effort to figure out where you should be at each training session. So I've been using this for a very short period of time, but I honestly believe, for the reasons that are kind of already indicated, this might be a superior method to autoregulation than traditional ones in a bodybuilding context. That said, I can't speak authoritatively on the matter. You know, my level of formal knowledge is limited, as I do not have a degree in exercise science, and you know, I haven't gotten a chance to apply this to myself all that much, or not at all to any of the athletes that I coach one-on-one. So what I'd ask is, if you would like to give this method a try and you do end up implementing in your own training, just let me know how it works. If you have issues with it theoretically, again, let me know, because I would like to improve on this, but so far it's been really successful for me. So I at least wanted to share it and put it out there so that you guys have another tool in your toolbox to use kind of going forward. So that's going to wrap up the video. I do want to take a quick second to thank Elite FTS for the opportunity. I also thank my sponsor, True Nutrition, who I've been a big fan of for a very long time. Taylor and I are getting geared up for the competitive season 2021, which we have a lot of big things planned. And so in the next week or two, we'll be sharing more videos on our approach to that and on the progress that I'm making. So I'm really excited. I got a few surprises that I don't think I can announce just yet, but I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you paying attention and following me, and I'll see you next time.